Good evening, people. Just wanted to jump on here and say happy Thanksgiving. And hopefully, everybody is recovering after all the food they've eaten. They probably have been in food coma for the last couple of days. It's been a wonderful time for us. I worked quite a bit this last week. Had yesterday, half of yesterday and today off, and I had Thanksgiving off, but we were actually having our Thanksgiving today. Um, just wanted to jump on here and talk about the why. That's kind of been on our on our minds for this past week. So like when our kids, they always ask us questions all the time, right? Like why this? Why is the pumpkin orange? Why is Emma wearing a blue jacket? Why is Trent wearing a black cowboy hat? Why is little short man over there wearing a beanie on his head? Why has he got little blue rain boots on? Right? So we always find ourselves asking the question why. And when it comes to permaculture and it comes to um, things that we just want to know why. What's the reason? What's the reason we do the things that we do, right? And so, like, why do we have a big giant pile of pumpkins? Why do we have a chicken tractor out here with hay behind it? You know, we're going to talk about those things here in a minute. But when I look out and you see a lot of this in America. Okay, you see these big old fields that are basically monocropped, the conventional farming practices. You walk out there and you can barely walk out there because you'll sink in mud, which it's a big mucky mess right now because it's rained and the practices have not built the soil. In fact, they've teared down the soil. And so you kind of ask yourself, well, why is it like that? Why has it been like that for so many years? If you look at the tree line, right? That's a tree line that is still left over from this land. That's the last bit of trees. But you can imagine, as tall as those trees are, that's what this whole landscape probably looked like. It was probably heavy woods. And then you ask yourself, well, why did they cut all the trees down? Right? So these are the kinds of questions that you want to start asking in your mind when it comes to looking at your own situation, your own land, or with people that you may be working with. Ask yourselves these questions, because then once you start digging into that, then you can get the answers to your questions, and not only the answers, but you can also get the solutions to fix them. So as you start digging into the whys, especially on the conventional end, by the way, I'll make a note that this is man's way. That is the world's way. That is what has been done for a long time, because these guys get subsidies from the government to grow crops that way. Okay? So as you can see, there's a big old tractor going by with a bunch of hay. You ask yourself, why is that tractor going by with a bunch of hay, right? Probably to feed cattle, especially in the cold winter months that we're coming into right now on the conventional side, because more than likely, the cattle that are on the land that they're going to, they have overgrazed and has not been managed well on that property. And now they're coming into fall and winter when the temperatures are colder, the grass is starting to die off because the soil wasn't built, and now they're having to feed hay to make up the difference. Now, I'm not against feeding hay in the winter. I'm not against where you have to supplement your cows or your livestock because the soil in the fields can't keep up with what you have. But something I do want to point out is if you manage your farm the right way, then you can sustain your cows, you can sustain your livestock on your fields, on your pasture through the fall, through the winter, into seasons that are typically considered off seasons. In Texas, our off season is the summer. Typically, we get 6 weeks of 100-degree temps that kill and destroy, not destroy, but it kills everything. It nukes everything. And there's not much grass for animals to be able to eat. So then you have to supplement. Again, that's another situation where you supplement with hay. So as you start reflecting on these things and you start getting the answers to your questions, then you're like, okay, well, then what's the solution, right? What can we do to restore our landscape? And you start digging into that. You start studying people like Joel Salatin. You start watching people like Greg Judy. You start listening to the videos by Justin Rhodes, right? Or if you stumble upon this video, you you hear what I have to say and my experience and my observations. So we've got this amazing shot of free pumpkins that we've been getting. Um, why do we have pumpkins? Well, right now we have chickens, we have meat birds, and we have layers. And we have had experience before where these pumpkins, okay, we know that they are very rich in nutrition for the animals. They're rich in vitamins and minerals. They are a natural dewormer, anti-parasitic for the birds, and the birds will actually eat it. It's also a food source. And an experiment that we did a few years ago, we had about 60 layers. They were out by that tree over there on this pasture. We had a bunch of pumpkins like this. Well, we ended up smashing them all up, and we threw hay over them, and we found a low spot in the pasture, and that's where we put the pumpkins in the hay. Well, those 60 to 70 layers ended up eating out of that area for about 3 months. All the bugs and the grubs came for the pumpkins to help decompose them. That became a food source for the birds. And of course, anybody knows with chickens, they're going to eat bugs before they eat anything because that's what they love to eat. So they were going through that. They were eating the pumpkin. They were eating the pumpkin seeds. They were scratching and manuring right there and making it very fertile. And it was awesome. And so we started implementing that practice whenever we have livestock. We start using pumpkins as a food source, as a soil builder, as an anti-parasitic or natural dewormer for our birds, because we don't believe in using chemicals or synthetics or herbicides and um, anything that's going to poison or make toxic the soil and the food source for our animals. We don't want that crap in our birds. We don't want that crap in our food, and we don't want that crap in our bodies. So another why, okay, why do we have a coop that's called a chicken tractor on pasture without a bottom where they're moved every day on fresh grass? Well, there's a lot of benefits to that, okay? It gives the birds a fresh bedding every day that keeps them clean and sanitary so they're not breathing in the ammonia from their own manure, because as soon as they start breathing in that ammonia, it literally starts stripping their bodies of vitamin A, vitamin D, I mean, all the different things that messes up their internal organs where they're breathing in fecal dust or fecal fumes, and it makes the birds sicker. It destroys their immune system. We don't want that. And a lot of factory houses, a lot of conventional chicken farms do this. Okay. I was a truck driver for 10 years. I used to drive through the states like Kansas, Nebraska, even into Colorado. And do you know when you go on those drives, I even had my windows closed, okay? And I could smell the feedlots from the beef and the chicken farms from 5 to 10 miles away on the highway, okay? And that tells me that if you smell things like that, you smell the stench, you're smelling mismanagement. And you're like, when chicken factory houses, when the workers have to go in there with a hazmat suit, that should make you question a lot. And this is the stuff that people are buying every day in the grocery store. So it might be time to start thinking about these things of the why and changing up where we buy our food. If we don't want to buy our food, then we can just grow it ourselves. And that's why I'm starting this channel, because I want to teach other people how to do this and how to do it themselves. Now, it's really funny because my wife's family, who they've been on this land for a while. I'm a Appalachian Mountain Virginia boy, okay? And I'm down here in the flat lands of Texas, or at least in the northern part up near Oklahoma. And this territory is definitely not what I prefer, but I follow wherever the Lord takes me to go. and I've learned this landscape and I've learned this area, and I get crazy looks all the time. That's why I wear this hat, just like Joel did with that title, and I wear it proudly. And I don't care. I'm not here to please man. I'm here to do what the Lord wants me to do, and this is my passion, and I love it. And I don't I don't like being prideful and cocky when you do things to prove people wrong. I don't like to rub it in people's faces. I just like to show them, hey, there's a better way, right? So, with this pile of pumpkins, the first question my father-in-law asked me is, what's all those pumpkins doing out there? And it's like, well, let's have a conversation about it. Let's talk about it. What can we use these for, right? And when you start thinking differently, and especially if you're on a budget and you're trying to farm regeneratively and grow your own food and homestead on a budget, then these are just things that you pick up and learn and you apply, and they work out wonderfully. And I know a lot of you that live this way, when you see pumpkins of any sort and you have livestock, you're like, man, this is great. It's in the fall. People have pumpkins they're not even using, and they no longer need them. What can we do with them? Right? It's a resource. It's a freely available resource that has multiple benefits. So another why is there hay put down, or straw, or wood chips, or whatever carbon you can get your hands on behind this chicken tractor as I'm moving the birds every day? Well, with your birds, depending on how many you have in that chicken tractor, right now we currently have about 90. We're going to be hitting 5 weeks on Tuesday, which is in 2 days from now. And we are going to be moving them. We're going to be separating them. So, where are we? Right here. There's 90 in there. We're actually going to split the group in two and put the 45 in another group, in another chicken tractor. But they put down quite a bit of manure and quite a bit of nitrogen. And when these birds put down that amount of nitrogen, especially in a 24-hour period, you're moving them every day, you have to be able to balance out the nitrogen with carbon to nitrogen ratio, so that it helps decompose everything properly and the soil can handle it and it actually rebuilds soil. Because if you don't address that issue, and it can be an issue if you have too many birds in one spot, then you're actually doing more harm than good on the pasture, and that's what you don't want. You don't want to burn out the pasture by putting too many birds in one spot. And we've seen a few operations where they've had too much nitrogen, and it's actually doing bad for the pasture than it is doing good and rebuilding it. Because the whole goal of doing it this way is to rebuild and take care of your soil. It's to prepare your soil for the next year. This comes back to feeding hay to your cows or to your livestock. Let's ask the question, we ask the question why, but let's ask the question, what if you could feed your cows on 4 to 5 acres, depending on how many cows you have, with just the grass all year long, by rotating them strategically, and you don't have to feed them hay, and you don't have to put them in a winter barn, okay? Now, obviously we're in Texas, so it's going to be a different setup than in Missouri or Iowa or Ohio, okay? But if you can start doing things to get your soil to where you can actually feed your livestock with what you have on pasture, because you did things the right way and you built your soil, you took care of the grasses, you grazed it right, you didn't have the cows overgraze it to where you have to feed them hay. All this is, and what it comes down to, is a management problem. It's just making small adjustments in the management. Now, most people, they don't want to put in the time and the effort and the work because they think it's too much. They think it's too intensive. But in the long run, it actually pays off. And in the long run, if you have an in-town job like I've had, where you have to be on a truck or whatever, and you manage it right, it can actually be something that gets you to where you can work at home with your animals and you're producing high quality products, you're value stacking, and you're growing amazingly clean food, microbes, soil, and all kinds of, and not only that, but I also look at growing children, my kids, as a part of that as well. And that's actually one of the most important works that you can do. Being able to pour into the next generation is also um, one of the most important works. A lot of farms, and I've met farmers that are like this, they're probably in their 50s and 60s now, and they never spent any time to slow down and pour into their kids. And then their kids don't even want to be a part of the farm or the land anymore because their dad was too busy, or he was too rough, or he was too stressed out to pour into them and teach them those things. Now, I'm not saying all farmers and families were like that, but I've seen a lot of it. And I know with my generation, we need to make a change. We need to pour into our kids. We need to teach them these ways, and especially with the regenerative farming movement and the homesteading, they need to learn this stuff, because I'm going to tell you right now, if the grid goes down, and being a truck driver, knowing that if the grid goes down, those grocery stores are going to be empty in 3 days and there's no supply runs coming from the trucks, that's it. What are you going to do for food? How are you going to feed your family? Okay. So there's multiple benefits, multiple things that are good for learning these ways and applying these principles and setting up your land for security. And not only that, but I would argue that skills are the best currency that you could have. Skills are the best currency that you can have in a situation like that, because then you can barter with your community. Okay? We did this at a recent event. If you guys look up Crunchy Mama Farms, they're out of Alvord, Texas, and we're good friends with them. They run a thing where they teach people how to butcher animals, and they turn it into a class, and then they open it up for other homesteaders and other people to go, and it's amazing. And they had a thing called Tribe Days that we went to, and they had a thing called Barter Town where people just came and bartered. And we've actually started doing this down here. We barter with other farms or other people. You know, my wife has an herbal tea company. She's fixing to open up an apothecary. I've bartered my heavy equipment and um, dirt scaping skills. Okay. And when you're able to barter with your community and you understand, it's kind of how it used to be back in the 1800s. You start understanding how things work that way. Having a community and building relationships along with skills are actually some of the best currency that you could ever have. That should be the currency you should be investing in, because those are things that will help you and last for a long time, even in a grid down situation. You know, as Joel Salatin, somebody asked him, who was the lunatic farmer. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He's awesome. Wealth of knowledge. The guy, all of his trial and error, which I think is one of the best teachers, he put into his books. He's been doing this stuff since the 60s and 70s when it comes to the homesteading, regenerative farming, and mastering this art. He's one of the best. Well, somebody asked him about investing in 401k and all that stuff, and he said, well, I don't really believe in the traditional sense of that. He said, what I do is if I get the money, then I just build another pond. Because he's built, I think, over 20 ponds now on his property, and he has water that's gravity fed to his entire farm that feeds all his animals. If I'm looking down, I'm looking at my mic to make sure it's still working because it's cut off on me a few times. But that water feeds his entire property, and every 200 feet, he's got a connect in a spigot where he can access that water for his livestock. So my kids, they're playing with each other right now. But that's the kind of thinking that we need to look into, because look, if the dollar crashes one day, or the grid goes down and the grocery stores shut down, and the trucks can't move, within 3 days, you're going to start seeing disruptions, and you need to be prepared for that. So this all kind of comes back to the why, and I hope that this is helping you start to think in your mind to question everything you're doing and take an inventory in every area of your life, especially when it comes to your homestead or your farm or if you're not a homestead or a farm, just growing your own food and figuring out how you can do that with what you have and what's in front of you and where you're at. That would be the time and the things I would be investing my time in to answer that why. Some people, it starts with looking at the ingredients at everything in the grocery store, looking at what's in their milk, looking at what's in bread, and how to do the alternative to make it clean food for their family. So begin to think about things like this: the why of why you do things, the why of where you get your food, the source. Why do they grow the food that way? Why do they put all these ingredients in all this different food? Okay, when you start going down that path, then you really start to understand what's going on and you start making changes. You start asking things like, why is the milk being processed a certain way when it goes to the store? Why is it pasteurized? Why is it homogenized? Right? Why are the chickens at the store that you buy get a bad rap? Okay, and I can tell you, one of my last hazmat loads that I ever did in the dry van side was a load of chemicals. I took to Tyson chicken. Okay, excuse the free range kids back there, they're just being kids. But I took a load of, basically it was super high peroxide, which was a hazmat load, by the way, because I've been in the hazmat world for a while, to the Tyson Chicken House, or Tyson Chicken Processing Place in Amarillo, Texas. They had their own water tower. They had their own operation. It was huge. They had their own security. Okay. And I can tell you, I could smell the stench from that area 5 miles away before I got there, inside the truck with the windows up. And when you go to an operation like that and you see the products that are in the grocery store and you start doing your digging, you ask yourself questions like, why? Why are they doing it this way? Why does the place smell like that? Why are they using peroxide? And if you study Joel Salatin and you read his books, then you know why. And you know why a lot of people are starting to grow their own meat. Okay? So I hope this stimulates your thinking on the question why. And stay tuned. We're going to keep this conversation going. And with that, I'm signing off. Permaculture Pat. You guys have a happy Thanksgiving and have a good day.